I was thinking to myself. The alien woman turned to me and smiled. So, you like my body? She said. The first thing Kieran Vale noticed about Zafira Station was the smell. Not the sterile, recycled air he'd expected, but something organic and faintly sweet, like copper and ozone mixed with whatever the botanist was growing in Hydroponics Bay 3. The second thing he noticed was that the gravity felt wrong. Not absent, not quite right either, but hovering somewhere in that uncanny valley where his inner ear kept insisting he was about to fall sideways. You'll get used to it in a week, said Rue, the pilot who'd picked him up from the transport dock. She was short, compact, with hair shaved on one side and an expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of stupidity the universe had to offer. Or you won't, and you'll spend 3 months walking like a drunk tourist. Either way, entertainment for the rest of us. Kieran hefted his pack higher on his shoulder and followed her through a corridor that curved in ways that shouldn't have been possible given the station's exterior dimensions. The walls were lined with bioluminescent panels, some kind of engineered algae, he guessed, that pulsed in slow rhythmic waves. It was beautiful in a lonely sort of way, like watching a heartbeat from the inside. How many people on station? He asked. 17. Counting you. 18 if you count the Ithari, but she keeps to herself mostly. Rue glanced back at him, one eyebrow raised. You know about the Ithari? I read the briefing. Reading and knowing are different things, friend. Just don't stare. They find it rude. They passed through a junction where 3 corridors met at odd angles, and Kieran caught his first glimpse of the station's heart, a massive observation window overlooking the dying star they orbited. The star was a bruised, angry red, its surface roiling with magnetic storms that sent tendrils of plasma spiraling into space. It was the kind of thing that should have terrified him, but instead he felt a strange calm, like he'd finally found a place that matched the emptiness he'd been carrying around inside. Beautiful, isn't it? Rue said, not waiting for an answer. Also extremely lethal. Radiation levels spike every 6 hours when we pass through the coronal ejection zone. You'll hear the alarms. Don't panic, the shielding's solid. Probably. Probably. Station's 40 years old. Some of the shielding's original. Some of it's duct tape and prayer. She grinned. Welcome to the edge of human space where safety regulations are more like friendly suggestions. Kieran's quarters were smaller than a storage closet, with a bunk that folded into the wall and a porthole that looked out at nothing but stars and the occasional chunk of ice drifting past. He dropped his pack and sat on the edge of the bunk, feeling the weight of 6 months' travel finally settle into his bones. He'd left Earth to escape the suffocating predictability of it all. The same job, the same conversations, the same hollow feeling that he was just going through motions someone else had written. Out here, at least the emptiness was honest. The comm panel beside his door chimed. A woman's voice clipped and professional. Vale, report to the engine bay in 20 minutes. Chief Engineer Ortiz wants to meet you. He didn't bother responding, just pulled on his work coveralls and headed back into the corridor. The engine bay was a cathedral of humming machinery, all gleaming conduits and magnetic containment fields that made the air taste like lightning. The fusion reactor sat at the center, like a captured sun, its core visible through layers of reinforced shielding. A sphere of white-hot plasma held in place by forces Kieran barely understood, but deeply respected. Chief Engineer Ortiz was a broad-shouldered woman with grease under her fingernails and a tablet computer that looked like it had survived a small war. You're the new maintenance tech, she said, not looking up. That's me. Good. The last one decided he missed Earth about 2 weeks in. Took the next transport out. She finally looked at him, her eyes sharp and evaluating. You going to last longer than 2 weeks? I didn't come here to leave. We'll see. She handed him the tablet. This is your section. Plasma conduits, magnetic containment backups, coolant systems. If something breaks, you fix it. If you can't fix it, you tell me before the reactor decides to turn us all into constituent atoms. Questions? Just one. The pilot mentioned someone Ithari on station. Ortiz's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Cultural exchange program. She studies our engineering methods. We pretend to understand theirs. Her name's Lyris. You'll probably see her around. Like Rue said, Don't stare. Kieran nodded and turned his attention to the tablet, scrolling through diagnostic readouts and maintenance schedules. But even as he worked, his mind was elsewhere, wondering what kind of person, what kind of being would choose to spend months on a dying station at the edge of nowhere, studying machines built by a species not their own. It wasn't until his third hour in the bay, elbow deep in a recalcitrant coolant pump, that he saw her. She moved like water through the engine bay, her presence so quiet that Kieran didn't notice her until she was standing 3 meters away, examining a plasma conduit with the kind of focus usually reserved for ancient religious texts. Her skin caught the light from the reactor core, shimmering with an iridescence that made her look like she'd been carved from moonlight and polished until she glowed. The long, delicate ears that swept back from her temples twitched slightly as she worked, and Kieran found himself frozen in place, wrench in hand, trying very hard not to stare and failing spectacularly. She didn't acknowledge him, just continued her examination, occasionally making notes on a device that looked like a sheet of liquid glass, suspended in a silver frame. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, Kieran forced himself to look back at the coolant pump and pretend he hadn't just spent half a minute gawking like an idiot. "You are the new human," she said. Kieran nearly dropped the wrench. Her voice was like wind chimes, musical and precise, with an accent that turned certain consonants into something softer. He looked up to find her watching him with an expression of mild curiosity. "Kieran," he managed. "Vale. I'm Kieran Vale. I am Lyris." She tilted her head slightly and the movement reminded him of a bird studying something unusual. "You have been here 3 days. You've been counting? There are only 18 of us. It is difficult not to notice changes." She turned back to the conduit, and Kieran felt oddly disappointed that she'd stopped looking at him. "This station's containment field design is inefficient." "Yeah, well, it's 40 years old. They didn't exactly have the latest technology when they built this place." "Age is not an excuse for poor design. My people have structures that are 3,000 years old and still maintain perfect resonance." There was no condescension in her voice, just a statement of fact. "But I suppose humans prefer to build quickly and replace often." Kieran felt a flash of defensive pride. "We prefer to build things we can actually fix when they break." "Bet your 3,000-year-old structures don't come with a maintenance manual." For the first time, something like amusement flickered across her features. "They do not break. Everything breaks eventually. Not if you build them correctly the first time." Kieran opened his mouth to argue, then realized she might actually be serious. He went back to his pump, shaking his head. "Must be nice being perfect. We are not perfect. We simply have different priorities." She moved closer, peering at his work. "What are you repairing?" "Coolant pump. The seals are degraded. Need to replace them before the whole thing fails and we lose thermal regulation in this section." "May I observe?" He blinked. "Sure, it's not exactly exciting." "I find human improvisation fascinating. You build systems that barely function, then spend enormous effort keeping them alive." She crouched beside him, close enough that he could smell something like frost and electricity. "It is very determined, perhaps stubborn. We call it making do. Yes, that is a very human concept." They worked in silence for a while, Kieran hyper-aware of her presence beside him. She asked occasional questions, technical ones about tolerances and materials, and he answered as best he could, trying to ignore the way her ears twitched when she was particularly interested in something. It was distracting in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "So," he said, mostly to fill the silence, "cultural exchange program. How's that going?" "It is educational." "That's one way to put it. What made you volunteer for something like this?" "Can't imagine a lot of Athari are lining up to spend months on a human rust bucket." She was quiet for a moment, and Kieran wondered if he'd offended her. Then, "I wanted to understand why humans build things that require so much maintenance. It seemed inefficient, wasteful. And now I think perhaps it is intentional. If nothing ever breaks, you never have reason to fix it, never have reason to improve, never have reason to." She paused, searching for the word. "To care." Kieran sat back on his heels, surprised. "That's actually kind of profound. Or perhaps I am overthinking it, and humans are simply bad at building things. He laughed, startled. Did you just make a joke? I am observing. If it is humorous, that is coincidental. But there was something in her expression that suggested otherwise. A slight curve at the corner of her mouth that might have been a smile. Over the following days, their encounters became something Kieran looked forward to. Lyris would appear in the engine bay at odd hours, always with questions, always watching him work with that intense, analytical focus. Rue noticed naturally and took every opportunity to make increasingly absurd comments during meals in the cramped station cafeteria. So, got yourself an alien girlfriend yet? She asked one evening, loud enough that half the crew turned to look. Kieran nearly choked on his protein paste. What? Number. She's just interested in the engineering. Sure, engineering. That's what we're calling it now. Rue grinned wickedly. Next, you'll be telling me you're just friends. We barely know each other. You spent 4 hours yesterday explaining thermodynamics to her. Either she's really interested in coolant systems, or she's interested in you. She's Ithari. They're naturally curious about you specifically, apparently. The alarm started as a low hum that Kieran felt in his bones before he heard it, then escalated into a shriek that sent every crew member scrambling. He was in his quarters when it hit, and by the time he'd pulled on his boots and made it to the corridor, emergency lighting had kicked in, bathing everything in crimson. Micrometeor strike, Section 7. Ortiz's voice crackled through the comm system. Hull breach contained. Emergency bulkheads engaged. If you're sealed in somewhere, stay put and don't touch anything stupid. Kieran was running toward the engine bay when the bulkhead in front of him slammed down with a pneumatic hiss that made his ears pop. He skidded to a halt, swearing, and turned to find another bulkhead descending behind him. He barely made it through, rolling into a dimly lit subsection of the bay just as the metal barrier crashed into place. The silence that followed was broken only by his breathing and the distant, muffled thrum of the reactor. Then he heard something else. A soft, musical curse in a language that sounded like glass breaking underwater. Lyris! She stepped out from behind a bank of magnetic coils, her skin glowing faintly in the emergency lighting. Kieran, it seems we are trapped together. Could be worse, he said, getting to his feet and brushing himself off. Could be trapped with Rue. She'd spend the whole time making jokes about our impending doom. Is that not what humans do when faced with crisis? Make light of it? Pretty much. Gallows humor. Keeps us from thinking too hard about the gallows. He moved to the nearest control panel and tapped it. Dead. Looks like we're here until they clear the breach and reset the bulkheads. Probably an hour, maybe 2. Lyris settled herself gracefully on the floor, her back against the wall, and gestured for him to sit. Then we wait. Kieran lowered himself down across from her, close enough to talk but maintaining what he hoped was a respectful distance. In the red emergency lighting, she looked even more otherworldly, her features cast in sharp relief, her eyes reflecting the glow like mirrors. You are nervous, she observed. Little bit. Not a fan of being sealed in confined spaces. Nor am I. On my world, we build with openness. Spaces that flow. This station feels like being inside a machine. That's because it is a machine, just one we happen to live in. He leaned his head back against the wall. What's your world like? I mean, I read the briefing materials, but those are always sanitized. All facts, no feeling. She was quiet for a moment, her long ears twitching in a way he'd learned meant she was thinking carefully. It is difficult to describe in human terms. Our cities are grown, not built. They resonate with harmonic frequencies that sustain them. Your closest equivalent would be music that has become architecture. That sounds incredible. It is home, but also, she paused and something flickered across her features. Suffocating sometimes. There are expectations, paths one is supposed to follow. I chose a different path. Is that why you're here? Perhaps. Or perhaps I am here because staying there felt like slowly calcifying, becoming stone. She looked at him directly, and the intensity of her gaze made his breath catch. Why did you come to Zephyra, Kieran Vale? He'd known the question was coming eventually, had practiced answers in his head, but sitting here in the red darkness with someone who'd just admitted to running from her own life, The practiced responses felt hollow. I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Had a relationship that fell apart because neither of us had the courage to admit we were just going through motions. Had a job that paid well, but felt like dying slowly. One day I woke up and realized I'd been living someone else's idea of what my life should be. So you ran. So I ran, he agreed. Not my proudest moment, but here we are. I think running is perhaps underrated. Sometimes the bravest thing is to admit when something is not working and choose differently. She tilted her head. Though your pilot friend would probably say we are both cowards. Kieran laughed. Rue would say worse than that. She'd say we're idiots for running toward a dying star instead of away from our problems. Perhaps we are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that Kieran had rarely experienced with anyone, let alone someone from another species. The reactor hummed its eternal song beyond the walls, and somewhere in the distance metal groaned as the station's superstructure adjusted to the temperature differential caused by the breach. Can I ask you something? He said finally. You may ask. I may not answer. Fair enough. What do the Athari think of humans? Really think, I mean, not the diplomatic stuff. Her ears flattened slightly, which he'd learned was the equivalent of a wince. Honestly, we think you are loud, chaotic. You build things without proper planning and seem surprised when they fail. You form emotional attachments with alarming speed and intensity. You are inefficient in nearly every measurable way. She paused. And yet you persist. Against entropy, against logic, against the universe itself telling you to stop. It is simultaneously frustrating and admirable. I'll take it. What do humans think of the Athari? That you're probably judging us constantly and finding us wanting, he said, then grinned, which, based on what you just said, is accurate. I am not judging you. You literally just listed all our flaws. Those are observations, not judgments. There is a difference. She leaned forward slightly. I think perhaps humans confuse assessment with criticism. I can observe that your species builds inefficiently while still finding value in the attempt. The summons came 3 days after the hull breach, delivered via the station commander's clipped professional tone through Kieran's personal comm. Commander Voss wanted to see him in her office immediately, which in station parlance meant he'd done something wrong and was about to hear about it. Her office was a cramped space near the command deck, walls covered in outdated star charts and maintenance schedules that looked like they'd been printed sometime during the previous century. Voss herself sat behind a desk that was mostly occupied by a three-dimensional holographic display of the station's systems, all rendered in various shades of amber and red that suggested nothing was working quite as intended. Vale, sit. Kieran sat. The chair was uncomfortable, probably intentionally. Voss deactivated the display and leaned back, her fingers steepled in front of her face. She was maybe 50, with the kind of weathered features that came from too many years breathing recycled air and watching budgets shrink. How are you settling in? Fine, Commander. The work's straightforward enough. And your interactions with our Athari guest? There it was. Kieran kept his expression neutral. Lyris has been observing maintenance procedures. She's curious about human engineering methods. It's part of the exchange program. I'm aware of what the exchange program entails, Vale. I'm also aware that you've been spending considerable time with her. Several crew members have mentioned it. She asks questions, I answer them. That's the whole point of having her here, isn't it? Voss's eyes narrowed slightly. The point is cultural exchange and diplomatic relations. The Athari are important allies, but they're also particular, about boundaries, about protocols. She leaned forward. I need you to understand that this isn't Earth. Out here, we can't afford to offend the wrong people. And the Athari, for all their talk of harmony and resonance, have very specific ideas about appropriate interaction between species. Kieran felt a flash of irritation. With respect, Commander, I haven't done anything inappropriate. We talk about coolant systems and reactor maintenance. That's it. I'm sure that's true. I'm also sure that intentions and perceptions don't always align. Voss pulled up a data pad and made a notation. Consider this a friendly warning, not a reprimand. Just Keep things professional. We only have a few months left before this station shuts down, and I'd prefer not to spend them managing an interspecies incident. Kieran left the office feeling like he'd been scolded for a crime he hadn't committed, which didn't improve when he ran into Rue in the corridor, and she immediately grinned like she knew exactly where he'd been. "Let me guess," she said. "Voss gave you the speech about keeping it professional with our elegant alien friend? Does everyone on this station know my business? It's a small station, Vale. We've got 18 people and roughly 4 interesting things happening at any given time. You and Lyris are currently occupying 3 of those slots." She fell into step beside him. "For what it's worth, I think Voss is being paranoid. Lyris clearly likes you, or at least finds you less annoying than the rest of us. She's just interested in the engineering." "Sure, and I'm just interested in flying because I like pushing buttons." Rue snorted. "Look, I'm going to give you some advice that you won't take because humans never do. Stop overthinking it. You like her. She seems to like you. The universe is big and cold and mostly empty. If you find someone who makes it feel less so, you don't waste time worrying about protocols." That's surprisingly philosophical for someone who once told me the meaning of life was avoiding paperwork. "I contain multitudes. Also, I'm bored and you're entertaining. Don't ruin it by being sensible." Kieran found Lyris later that evening in a place he hadn't known existed. A small observation deck tucked away in one of the station's older sections, accessible only through a maintenance corridor that looked like it hadn't been used in years. She was sitting on the floor in front of a transparent dome that looked out at the dying star, her posture perfectly still, her reflection ghostly in the curved glass. "How did you find this place?" he asked. "I explore when I cannot sleep. Human stations have many forgotten spaces." She glanced at him, and something in her expression suggested she'd been expecting him. "You may sit if you wish." He lowered himself beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and together they watched the star pulse and flare. This close to it, the details were staggering. Magnetic storms that could have swallowed Earth whole, coronal mass ejections that streamed away like rivers of fire, the slow, inevitable collapse of fusion at its core. "It's dying," Lyris said quietly. "In perhaps 10,000 years, it will collapse completely, become a white dwarf, cold and dense and dead." Cheerful thought. Is it not beautiful, though? The way it fights, the way it continues to burn even as it consumes itself. Her voice was soft, almost wistful. "On my world, we have perfect stability, systems that last millennia, but they are static, unchanging. There is beauty in that, but also loneliness." "Do you ever think," Kieran said, surprising himself, "that loneliness is just another kind of gravity? That it pulls us toward each other even when we resist?" She turned to look at him fully, her eyes reflecting the star's crimson light. "Yes, I think that often." The plasma conduit in Section 12 had been giving false readings for 3 days, and Kieran had finally managed to isolate the problem to a sensor array that was buried behind enough magnetic shielding to make his tools useless. He'd been at it for 2 hours, lying on his back with his arms extended into a maintenance shaft that smelled like ozone and burnt insulation, when he realized he wasn't alone. He couldn't see her from his position, but he knew it was Lyris. He'd become attuned to her presence in a way that would have embarrassed him if he'd stopped to think about it. The way the air seemed to shift when she entered a space, the faint sound of her breathing, the almost imperceptible hum she made when she was concentrating. "You are thinking very loudly," she said. Kieran nearly hit his head on the conduit housing. "I'm thinking loudly?" Ithari can sense certain electromagnetic patterns. Strong emotions create interference. Yours is particularly noticeable right now. He extracted himself from the maintenance shaft, his coveralls streaked with grease, and found her standing near the reactor core, with her head tilted in that curious way of hers. The light from the containment field painted her in shades of blue and white, and for a moment Kieran forgot what he'd been doing entirely. "What kind of interference?" he managed. "The kind that suggests you are thinking about something other than sensor arrays." Her ears twitched forward slightly. "Or perhaps thinking about sensor arrays in connection with something else. That's a very diplomatic way of saying I'm distracted." "You have been distracted for several days now. Is it the conversation with your commander?" Of course she knew about that. Word travels fast on this station. There are only 18 of us. Sound travels through bulkheads. Privacy is an illusion. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the faint iridescence of her skin shifting in the reactor's glow. Your commander believes I am a potential diplomatic incident. She's just being cautious. It's her job. And what do you believe? The question hung between them like a charge building in a capacitor. Kieran wiped his hands on his coveralls, buying himself time to think. But the truth was he'd been thinking about nothing else for days. I believe, he said carefully, that you're here to study human engineering, that we've become friends maybe, that I look forward to seeing you, which is probably more than I should admit given the whole diplomatic incident concern. Friendship, Lyris repeated, testing the word. Is that the human term for two people who seek each other out despite having no practical reason to do so? That's one definition, yeah? And if I told you that Athari do not form friendships quickly, that we are taught to maintain appropriate distance, to observe rather than engage, to value solitude over connection? Her voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it that made Kieran's pulse quicken. What would you say then? I'd say rules are made to be broken, or at least bent until they're more like suggestions. For the first time since he'd met her, Lyris laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm, bright and unexpected. You are very human, Kieran Vale. Your species treats boundaries as invitations. Only the good boundaries. The boring ones we respect completely. He hesitated, then took a chance. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want. I have learned that when humans say you can tell me it's none of my business, they very much hope you will not. Guilty, but I'm asking anyway. Why did you really come here? The cultural exchange program answer is fine for official reports, but we both know there's more to it. Her expression shifted, became something more guarded. She turned away from him, back toward the reactor, and for a moment Kieran thought he'd pushed too hard. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible over the reactor's hum. On my world, there are paths. Everyone follows them. Birth to education, to contribution, to legacy. The paths are beautiful, efficient. They work. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that seemed very human and very vulnerable. But I looked at my path and saw 10,000 years of people walking the exact same way. I saw my future already lived by countless others, and I could not breathe. So you left. So I ran. Like you. Like everyone on this station, I think. We are all refugees from lives that did not fit. She glanced back at him. Your pilot friend was correct. This place is where the lost things gather. Rue said that? Not in those words. She said we are all idiots who would rather orbit a dying star than face our problems. But I believe my translation is more poetic. Kieran laughed despite himself. Yeah, that sounds like Rue. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared confessions settling between them. Then Lyris moved back to where he'd been working, peering into the maintenance shaft with professional interest. You have not fixed the sensor array. I got distracted by someone thinking loudly. That is understandable. Your thoughts are very loud. She knelt beside the shaft, her movements fluid. May I try? Ithari fingers are more slender. I might reach the connection you cannot. They worked together for the next hour. Lyris's hands where his couldn't fit. Kieran talking her through the repair with a patience he hadn't known he possessed. She was a quick learner, intuitive in ways that had nothing to do with prior knowledge, and everything to do with simply understanding how things worked. When the sensor finally came back online, displaying clean readings across his diagnostic tablet, she made a small sound of satisfaction that made him smile. We make a good team, he said. Yes, she agreed, meeting his eyes. We do. The announcement came during the morning shift, Commander Voss's voice crackling through every comm panel on the station with news that everyone had been expecting, but nobody wanted to hear. Zephyra Station was being decommissioned. 3 months until shutdown. Budget reallocations, shifting priorities, the usual corporate language that translated to, we're not profitable enough to keep the lights on. Kieran was in the engine bay when he heard it, elbow deep in a coolant system that wouldn't matter in 90 days. He pulled his hands free and just stood there, listening to the reactor's eternal hum and feeling the weight of an ending he hadn't prepared for. "You are upset," Lyra said from behind him. He turned to find her leaning against a support strut, her expression unreadable. "Aren't you?" "I knew this would happen. Nothing lasts. Not stations, not civilizations, not stars." She gestured toward the reactor. "Even this will one day go cold." "That's a depressing way to look at it." "Is it?" "I think it makes the time we have more valuable. Scarcity creates meaning." She moved closer, and Kieran noticed something different in her posture, a tension that hadn't been there before. "What will you do when the station closes?" "I don't know, haven't thought that far ahead." He leaned against the workbench, suddenly exhausted. "Probably go back to Earth. Find another job fixing things that don't matter. Pretend I learned something out here." "And did you?" "Learn something?" He looked at her, really looked at her, this being from another world who'd somehow become the most important person in his life without him noticing the exact moment it happened. "Yeah, I learned that running away is only useful if you're running towards something better. Otherwise, you're just changing locations." "That is very wise for a human." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I have also learned something. I learned that loneliness is not solved by perfect systems or harmonic cities. It is solved by finding someone who sees you and does not look away." The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Kieran's heart was doing something complicated in his chest, and he had the distinct sense that whatever he said next would matter more than anything he'd said in his entire life. "Lyris, You have been staring at me for weeks," she said, cutting him off. "Watching when you think I do not notice. Your electromagnetic signature spikes whenever I enter a room. The entire station has made assumptions about our relationship, and you have done nothing to contradict them." "I didn't want to presume. Do I fascinate you that much?" She took another step closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in her eyes. "You who talks to machines and believes broken things are worth fixing?" "Yes," he said, because there was no point in lying anymore. "You fascinate me. You've fascinated me since the first day I saw you. The way you move, the way you think, the way you see the universe. I can't stop thinking about you, and I'm sorry if that's inappropriate or—" "So you like my body?" she asked, and there was something playful in her tone now, something that made his breath catch. "I like everything about you," he said honestly. "Your body, your mind, the way you make terrible jokes with a completely straight face, the way you hum when you're concentrating, the way you see patterns in chaos. Everything." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. "I have been watching you too, Kieran Vale. The way you care for broken systems as though they are living things. The way you listen when I speak, as though my words matter. The way you ran from Earth, but found the courage to stop running when you arrived here." Her hand moved to rest over his heart. "Your species confuses me. You are inefficient and emotional, and you form attachments with alarming speed. But you are also brave in ways my people are not. You choose connection over perfection. Is that a good thing?" "I think it is the best thing." She leaned closer, and Kieran stopped breathing entirely. "My people would say this is inappropriate, that I am here to observe, not to engage, that I should maintain distance." "And what do you say?" "I say that I did not come to the edge of human space to follow the same rules I ran from." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I say that perhaps the bravest thing is to admit when you have found something worth staying for." The reactor hummed around them, a heartbeat that had outlasted careers and relationships in the slow entropy of everything. Kieran thought about all the reasons this was complicated: species differences, diplomatic protocols, the fact that in 3 months the station would be dark and empty, and they'd both be scattered to different corners of space. He thought about all of it for exactly 2 seconds, and then he stopped thinking entirely. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now?" Lyris's smile was small but genuine. "Now we find out if what we have here can survive in the real world. If it dissolves like breath in vacuum, or if it is something stronger. That's terrifying." "Yes, but also exciting. Very human, this combination of fear and hope." She stepped back slightly, though her hand remained on his chest. 3 months until the station closes. Then we choose. Together. Rue found them an hour later, still in the engine bay, sitting side by side and talking about nothing and everything. She took one look at them and grinned. About time, she said. I was starting to think you'd both just orbit each other forever without actually connecting. Very poetic, but terrible for station morale. Kieran felt his face heat, but Laris just tilted her head curiously. And why does our connection affect station morale? Because watching you two dance around each other was painful. Now at least we can all relax. Rue paused. Also, Voss owes me 50 credits. I bet you'd figure it out before decommissioning. She said you'd both be too professional. You bet on us? Vale, we bet on everything out here. It's how we stay sane. She turned to leave, then glanced back. For what it's worth. I'm glad you stopped running. Both of you. When she was gone, Kieran turned to Lyris. So, 3 months. 3 months, she agreed, to decide what comes next. He took her hand, cool, smooth, alien, perfect. I already know what I want. As do I. She squeezed his fingers gently. But let us take these 3 months anyway, to be certain, to build something that will not break when we leave this place. Sounds very Athari. Planning ahead. I am learning from humans. Sometimes improvisation has value. She stood, pulling him up with her. Come, your coolant system still needs repair, and I would like to help. We make a good team. Yeah, Kieran said, looking at her and seeing his future reflected in eyes that caught starlight. We really do. Outside the station, the dying star continued its slow collapse, burning against the darkness with everything it had left. And inside, in the warm hum of the reactor bay, 2 people who'd run from different worlds found something neither had expected. A reason to stop running and the courage to find out what happened next. The end.